which he could add to his library, could be extremely lucrative.
The story goes that the Caliph al-Ma'mun was so obsessed that he would send his messengers out of Baghdad far and wide to distant lands just to get hold of books that he didn't possess for the translation movement. And anyone who brought him back a book that he didn't have, he'd repay him its weight in gold.
To give some sense of the extent of this activity, sort of between 750 and 950, somebody called An-Nadim, who wrote a list of sort of the intelligentsia of the Abbasid era, lists 70 translators. So it was quite a large cohort of people involved in translation, and obviously he only named the well-known. They could get up to 500 gold dinars a month, which is probably around $24,000, which is a huge sum of money for what they were doing. It was a very, very prestigious, well-paid, well-patronized activity.
And motivating this global acquisition of knowledge was a pressing practical concern, one that rarely crosses our minds today. This is the new library at Alexandria in Egypt. But fresh in the memory of many in the empire was the story of the destruction of the original library at Alexandria centuries earlier, and the shocking loss of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge.
One of the things that we tend to forget, because we live in an age of massive information storage and perfect communication, more or less, is the ever-present possibility of total loss. That was very, very important for medieval Islamic scholars. They knew extremely well that writings could be forgotten or buried or burnt or destroyed, that cities could pass away. And what we see in Baghdad or Cairo or Samarkand is exactly the gathering together, translation, analysis, accumulation, storage, and preservation of material that they were well aware could be entirely lost forever.
And if there was one branch of knowledge that everyone, from the mighty caliph to the humble trader, wanted to preserve and enhance, it was medicine. These were, after all, times when few lived to old age. Writings from the time remind us that what we might consider a relatively minor infection today could be a death sentence. Religious teachings, then, were not just a source of comfort. They were a constant reminder that we should never give up.
In the Hadith, which is the collected sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, it says, "Ma anzala Allahu da'an illa wa anzala lahu dawa'an," which means that God did not send down a disease without also sending down its cure.
It's statements like this that lead Muslims, even today, to believe that cures for all diseases are out there somewhere, and that we need to search to find them. To assess how this optimism actually affected Islamic medicine, I met up with Dr. Peter Porman in the Syrian capital Damascus. He's a leading expert on Islamic medicine who spends much of his time researching here in the Middle East.
What people don't realize is that the history of Islamic medicine is really the history of our medicine, because our medicine, the university medicine we used until the 19th century, it was based to a large extent on all these work of these Islamic physicians.
Islamic medicine built extensively on the foundations laid by the ancient Greeks. The most highly prized and among the first to be translated into Arabic were the medical manuscripts of the 3rd century Greek physician Galen.
Galen believed that a healthy body was one in balance, a balance of 4 types of fluids called humours, which circulate through the body, and any one of which, if out of balance, would cause illness and a change of temperament. The 4 humours were yellow bile, which, if in excess, would cause the patient to become bilious or bad-tempered and nauseous. Blood, too much of which would cause the patient to become sanguine or cheerful and flushed. Black bile, which in excess would cause the patient to become lethargic, melancholic, even depressed. And phlegm, which in excess would cause the patient to become phlegmatic or apathetic and emotionally detached. Galen argued that illnesses are caused by an imbalance in one of the humours, and so the cure lies in draining the body of some of that humour. And so he recommended techniques like cutting to induce bleeding or using emetics to induce vomiting.
But Islamic doctors were acutely aware that Galen and Greek medicine were only one source of medical knowledge. There were other traditions of medicine that they were equally keen to incorporate into their understanding of how the body functioned. Medieval Arabic texts refer to wise women, folk healers who provided medical drugs. This tradition continues today, as I found when I came across one for myself in the back streets of Hammamat in Tunisia. This is Arafat Nabil. She's been running her shop selling medicinal herbs and spices for over 20 years. She believes that her remedies can cure a wide range of medical ailments.
مثلا هذه عشبة
نعم.
اسمها شيح، تنحى الدود من البطن، تنحي جميع الأوجاع الداخلية. بعد من الزرنيخ ينحي الثعلبة، وبعشبة هذه اللي تراها أنت تويكة تنحي تقولوا أنت البرص.
اوكي.
مثال هذوما مثلا كما هذه وهذه للصرع والجنون. صرع يحطها ويحط شويه في المخده نتاعو، ما عادش بك يشدوا الكريز هذاك.
وفي يعني مثلا من العصر اليوناني اقدم منها ما تستعمل ولا لو؟
والله اجي نكلم كل ما هو قديم في الاعشاب انا نتبعه. فهمتني؟ باش نزيد معلومات.
In the back streets of Tunisia, this knowledge is still being used. But medieval Islamic doctors were also aware of other traditions of medicine from China and India. And yet another tradition of medical guidance came from within Islam itself and takes some of its ideas from the Quran and some from the collected sayings of the Prophet, the Hadith. In a bookshop in Monastir in Tunisia, I found a copy of a very popular book, available right across the Islamic world.
This book is called The Prophet's Medicine, and see how old it is. The author was born between 691 and 751 Hijri, which places him in the 14th century. Here's an interesting bit where it deals with the plague. فَإِذَا سَمَعْتُمْ بِهِ بِأَرْضٍ فلا تدخلوا عليه وإذا وقع بأرض وأنتم بها فلا تخرجوا منها فرارا منه. It says, if you come across a land where the plague has come down, then do not enter that land. And if the plague comes down onto your land and you are there, then do not leave your homes in the hope of escaping it. So it sort of makes a lot of sense. But here's quite an amusing part. It deals with epilepsy. And it says that the Greeks, or Galen, believed that epilepsy originated in the brain. So, however, they were ignorant. They didn't realize the true cause of epilepsy, which is the possession of the body by evil spirits. And it talks about the cure for epilepsy being exorcism.
Hardly scientific. But Islam's most tangible